the first step in all of this, what Jesus calls us to do, is this form of self-judgment. Well, we said that this is just one of three ways that Jesus calls for us to judge in this passage. Because so far, everything that I've said, it sounds right along with the culture. Yeah, how can I speak out against anyone else? I know what my mess is. But Jesus continues by asking the questions. He continues this conversation to show what right judgment looks like, what it is right judgment looks like. After this time of self-judgment, looking at our life, removing the log from our own eyes, he says, then you can see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's. After this place of looking at where do I fall short, where do I still have sins in my own life, and dealing with those, then we can speak into the other person's life to offer care and correction. And this is the same thing that we find all throughout the Bible. I think Galatians chapter 6 captures this quite clearly. It says, brothers, if anyone is caught in transgression, which could only happen after you see that take place in their life, it's this aspect of judgment to see that they are caught in transgression. So if anyone is caught in transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you be tempted too, which is an aspect of self-judgment, to see are we falling victim of the exact same thing. So the idea is that once we've dealt with our sins, once we acknowledge that we still fall short, we still have sins that we struggle with, once we acknowledge that and deal with that, then we can gently and lovingly confront and try to restore others as well. The aspect of it is not who are you to judge me. It's we are called to help each other. And one of the ways that we can do so is by seeing where do we all still fall short. But we come with this aspect of not being hypocrites, not pointing out your flaws to put you down. Instead, it's to build you up. See, there's two ways in this that I think are problematic when we ignore that Jesus is calling us to right judgment. If we ignore the teaching of Jesus, it actually puts us in a worse place. That idea of who are you to judge me? If we just want to score cheap and easy points, we could say, well, that itself is a judgment, and so you apparently are the one to judge me. But more so than that, by this idea of who are you to judge me, that's another form of pride working itself in our lives. It's so easy to look at the obnoxious, arrogant, always critical person and say, look at how proud this person is. But it's just as proud to say no one can say what's right and what's wrong. No one is allowed to judge. No one is allowed to evaluate. So being always judging is driven by pride. Never judging, that's also driven by pride. But the second reason why this is problematic is by saying, who are you to judge me? That's a way that we can insulate ourselves from any sort of correction, any sort of growth. That we are called to help each other to grow more and more in the likeness of Christ, not the likeness of our own choosing, which is less than the perfection that Jesus has meant for us. And so as we can critique, as we can evaluate, as we can help each other, that is a way for us to grow more and more in the likeness of Christ. But that can't happen if we are silent all the time. I think this gets to another aspect of a way that we apply this passage. It's helping us to see the problem is not judging itself. The problem is not critiquing or evaluating other people's life. The problem is the attitude that is behind it. And we talked about that before. It says, judge not that you will be judged. That if we are cruel, that if we are unkind, that is the type of judgment that we will receive. We are reflecting something that falls short of the standard of God. But it's not as though judge not that you will not be judged. Like it's not that we go before the judgment seat of God and we say, you got some heinous sins in your life, but you never judged anyone, so my hands are tied. You're in, welcome to heaven. That's of course not what the passage is saying. I am going to be judged. We talked about this in the book of Revelation, that all will appear before the judgment seat of Christ. But it's that type of judgment that we receive that is reflected in how I assess and evaluate and help other people. that I will be judged by the God of mercy, who sent his son to die for my sins. I did nothing to earn that, yet he poured out his love and his mercy upon me. So as I am around other Christians, I want to pour out love and mercy in the same way that I have received that. I want to help build you up. I don't want to point out flaws in you. I don't want you to point out flaws in me just so we can try to feel better about ourselves. We need to grow. We want to grow in the likeness of this merciful God who has done all this to save us. The judgment that we will receive ought to be reflected in the way that we assess and evaluate and help each other. But one of the ways that this falls short is a common application of this for Christians is, well, I can't say anything. I can't speak up to this person's life. I know I still have a log in my eye. I know very well what my problems are, my sins that I'm still wrestling with. Like I would love to put these to death, but I still continue to go back to these things. So I can't speak up to this other person's life. I know what my log is. But that's not the application that Jesus is driving for either. The point is not to avoid correction or care. Jesus is showing us how we speak up. It says, then you can see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. It is telling us what correction and care looks like. If we avoid that correction and care, we're avoiding the teaching of Jesus. Instead, it's oftentimes because someone still has a log in their own eye that they are best to be a support for other people. Because the proper understanding of this, rather than putting down other people or pointing out their flaws just so I feel better about me and dealing with the same thing, that the opposite ought to be true. I ought to be driven closer to you to say, hey, I struggle with the same thing. Here's what's helped, or here's how I'm continuing to work through it. Here's how we can be together as we're struggling through this difficulty. I mean, the idea, for example, that the difficulty that I've gone through in my marriage can't be a support to you until I have a perfect marriage, that's not at all what the teaching is. It's often those struggles, those difficulties that are a support for other people. In substitute marriage for whatever it is that's been your past, that's been your struggles. This could be anger, this could be alcohol, or parenting, or pornography, or whatever it is that you continue to struggle with. There are people in this room that struggle with the same thing that would be greatly benefited from hearing your stories. But it's focused on the mindset. It's not, I can't say anything. I know what my log is. You know what your log is. That's the point. It's not to be a hypocrite. You're not being a hypocrite when you recognize the depth of your sin nature. You're not being a hypocrite when you recognize what Jesus is still doing inside of your life. And so, yes, we turn all things over to Jesus. Yes, we understand that we're not going to just put down the other person. Yes, we recognize that there is a tendency to call out other people for struggling through the same things. But when we understand the grace that's been poured out on us, that changes our mindset in this. Rather than I see the same thing in you, so I'm going to draw everyone's attention to that, so you're not looking at me, it's, hey, I am struggling with this. I think we can help each other. And that's the right judgment that happens in this. That's the way that Jesus is calling for us to be a part of building each other up, where our tendency is to put people down because of their flaws. Instead, we see our own, and that brings us together for the purpose of growing closer and closer in the way Jesus has called us to do. The teaching is not that we cannot speak up until we're perfect. It is speak up. But how we do so, not out of pride, not ignoring our own struggles, that is the difference between sinful and right judgment.